Well, welcome to the Speak with People podcast. My name is Jason Raitz. I'm so excited that you are joining us today. We believe that healthy communication is oxygen for your relationships and your leadership. So whether you communicate one-on-one, to a team, from a stage, or from behind a screen, we hope that our time today encourages you, challenges you, and inspires you to choose to communicate in healthy ways. Well, on today's podcast, I'm so excited because we start a brand new series called How to Tell a Really Good Story. And I am beyond excited for this series because I have loved story from as long back as I can remember. I love telling stories, I love listening to stories, and I love the study of story. And it's been said that the 6 most powerful words in any language are, let me tell you a story. Stories bring life, they inspire. And so today we're going to try to answer the question, why do stories matter? And we all love stories. And today we're going to dive into some incredible questions. Aren't stories just important for our favorite movies? What can stories do for my leadership, for our businesses? Can I become a good storyteller? Why do they matter? And so what I'm excited about personally as a leader is I get to interview an incredible author and leader. He's one of the world's leading experts on organizational storytelling. He's authored many books. 2 of them were Amazon bestsellers. And so I'm so excited to welcome Paul Smith to the Speak with People podcast. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me on. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Well, hey, could you tell us just a little bit more about you, kind of your story, where you're from, what you do, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and then I can tell you why I'm not a fan of those 6 words, by the way, that you kicked us off with.
Okay, I love it.
But yeah, so I haven't been doing this my whole life. I spent the first 20 years of my career in more typical corporate career path. I studied economics in undergrad. I got an MBA. I've spent a couple of years as a consultant for Accenture, and then 20 years at the Procter & Gamble company. My last job there was vice president of consumer research for one of our major global business units.
Oh,
but
wow.
Along that journey, I just got fascinated with this concept of storytelling, and that frustrated me because I didn't know how to do it. And they didn't teach me that in undergrad, and they didn't teach me that in grad school, and they didn't teach me that at Anderson. And believe it or not, they didn't even teach me that at P&G. And so I kind of had to learn it on my own. And through that process of trying to figure it out, it occurred to me, well, gosh, if I want to know this that badly, maybe other people do as well. So I went out, this learning journey became an idea for a book instead of just my own little selfish learning journey. And that led to a whole different career path for me.
Wow. Well, that's exciting. Well, so let's just jump right in. I mean, what do you believe about the intrinsic power of storytelling? Why does it matter so much?
Yeah, I think, there are a lot of reasons, but probably the most important one is that stories help people make decisions. It turns out, we humans don't make the logical, rational decisions that we'd like to think we do, or we don't always. In fact, some people would argue we rarely do. It turns out most of the decisions that we make are made in a subconscious, emotional processing part of our brain. And then those decisions are rationalized a few nanoseconds later in a more conscious thinking, logical processing part of the brain. So we leave a decision-making process only aware of the conscious part of it, but unaware of the emotional subconscious part of that decision-making process. And the truth is, our logical brain is just trying to catch up a few nanoseconds later. And stories are just uniquely well qualified to reach that subconscious emotional processing part of the brain. And so if you want to be effective influencing people, whether that's leadership or sales or marketing, it turns out you need to talk to both parts of the brain. And stories, like I said, are just uniquely well qualified to help us reach that subconscious emotional processing part of the brain so that we can make well-informed, full brain, decisions.
Wow. So in your own life, have you personally experienced, the impact of stories? Like, when did it start to come alive for you?
Yeah. Oh, well, many times. In fact, the best way to answer that is to give you an example. In fact, the reason I got into the career path that I'm in now, so I told you I went through that process of learning about storytelling and then deciding, well, what I really want to do is I want to write a book about this and change my career path to being, an author and a speaker and a trainer on the art and the science of storytelling. But doing that in your mid 40s with a wife and a couple of kids at home is, a pretty risky endeavor, something you might be facing yourself sometime, right?
Yes.
Um, and so I needed to make a decision. Am I going to quit my, corporate executive job in the middle of my career and go do something crazy, or am I going to stick it out for another
Mm,
decade or so and do this after I retire? And the truth is, Jason, mentally I'd gotten to the point that I wanted to do that, but I was still scared. I was just, I didn't have the guts to pull the trigger. And so I asked my dad for some advice. He was 80 years old at the time and hard of hearing, so I couldn't call him on the phone anymore. I had to write him letters, and so I wrote him a letter and told him everything I just told you, and asked him for his advice. And I thought, well, he's going to write me back, and he's a good dad, so he's going to give me either one of two pieces of advice. He's either going to say, "Oh, I believe in you, son. You can do this. Just go pursue your dream. I know you got this, right?"
yep.
Or he's going to be the other kind of good dad and say, "Are you nuts? Like, son, just head down, keep after this for another 8 or 10 years and retire comfortably, and then go play around with all this silly, book writing business, right? Be the practical dad, right?" But he didn't do either of those things. All he did in this letter was he told me a story about himself. He said, when I was 5 years old, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life. He said, I wanted to be a singer, like
Mm,
Frank Sinatra or Tony Bennett or, Sammy Davis Jr. I mean, he was 80, right? It was a
yeah.
rat pack. That was his genre. And he said, I knew that for sure the first day of the first grade. He said, when the teacher asked all of us if any of us had any special talent, like dancing or magic tricks or something. And he said, I raised my hand and I said, well, I can sing, despite the fact that he'd never sung in front of anybody but his mom in the kitchen, right?
Right.
Well, Jason, what do you think a good teacher would do when young 5-year-old Bobby says that he can sing?
Oh, well, okay, then let's let you sing.
Absolutely. So young Bobby Smith got up and he belted out his favorite song right there, a cappella, in front of the teacher and all the other students. And he tells me in this letter, he says, son, I nailed it. He said, I got all the words, all the melody right. It was awesome. And he said, the other students and the teacher stood up and they applauded me. He said, I got a standing ovation my first time to sing in front of an audience. And he finished this letter by saying, unfortunately, that turned out not just to be the first time I ever sang in front of an audience. It
Mm.
turned out to be the last time
Oh,
that I ever sang in front of an audience. And he said, life got in the way, but the truth is I just never had the courage to go through with it. And he said, that was 75 years ago.
mm,
And there's not a month that goes by that I haven't thought about that and regretted that decision. And he said, he closes the letter with these words, as if that wasn't enough. And by the way,
mm.
it was plenty. He
Wow.
closes the letter with these words. He said, I'd love to see you achieve your dream, but that doesn't mean in your lifetime, son. That means in mine.
Mm.
And I just thought, oh man, TikTok, the guy's 80, right? I mean, you know,
Wow.
and Jason, he was laying down the gauntlet in front of me and challenging me to pick it up like right now, not some
Wow.
off time in the distant future, right? So literally 2 days later, I walk into my boss's office and I quit my 20-year career to pursue this dream. And I
Wow.
absolutely would not have done it that quickly had it not been for that
Yep.
letter. And that was absolutely the best decision I ever made. And so, I mean, that story changed my life, quite literally changed the direction of my life. And in fact, that's why the second book I ever wrote, the first book was Lead with a Story.
Yep.
The second one I wrote was Parenting with a Story,
Ah,
because of stories like that parents can tell their kids that will absolutely change their lives for the better. So
yes.
I think storytelling is good for us at work and at home.
Well, I think why I've, enjoyed your books and, as we started speak with people, I love your with component,
Yeah.
lead with a story, parenting with, because I remember listening to a podcast once where you talked about the parenting with a story. And I thought, oh my goodness, so many parents need to learn about this because for years, right? That's the only way that we taught our kids about our previous generations was through story. Is that why, they have this ability to resonate with people so much on a deep level? Because, we pass them down from generation to generation, or what else is there that just helps connect them to people that, like you, I mean, it was like it changed your life. Like,
Right. Yeah. And there probably is, some deep psychological reason that I'm not going to be able to articulate
yeah.
as to why. What I do know is that what you just said is true. There's something about storytelling that resonates with human beings on a
Mm,
deep, visceral level in a way that PowerPoint slides don't,
Right.
and bullet points don't, and sales pitches
Right.
don't, and so it's part of what makes us human,
Yeah.
and not automata or robots or something. And so,
Yep.
yeah, there's something very, very unique about stories that cannot be separated from its humanity.
Yeah. Do you, just to go off script here for a second, but are there any storytellers when you were, when you first started, this journey that you're on that really captured you that you thought, okay, I've got to learn a lot from these storytellers?
Well, uh, the first thing I did when I first realized that storytelling was an important leadership skill set, I read all the books I could find on the topic, and
Mm,
there's some great ones out there. I think Annette Simmons' books were the first ones that I read, and David Hutchins and um, David Armstrong. He's passed away since, but in fact, his was probably the first book that I read. And these are all books that are written probably 20 years ago, or
mm,
maybe longer. Um, uh, and they definitely convinced me that storytelling was a skill set that I could learn, and that it would behoove me to learn.
yeah.
But then I very quickly ran into people that I knew personally, because I started interviewing senior leaders, executives that I thought were good at it. But inside the company where I worked was just Procter and Gamble. John Pepper, was the CEO of the company, the chairman of the board at the time, and um, he was a phenomenal storyteller.
Mm,
And I'm convinced that's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons why he became the CEO, and and other people didn't. But then,
mhm,
of course, I ended up interviewing people outside the company too, and I ran into a lot of people who were really good storytellers who you would have never thought would be good storytellers. For example, I've probably interviewed 300 or so CEOs, executives,
wow.
leaders at companies all over the world at this point in the last 10 years. And like a couple of them probably worthy of mentioning, because I didn't expect them to be such good storytellers. One
Yeah.
of them was Sarah Matthew. She
Mm,
was the CEO of Dun and Bradstreet. She's since retired, but um, before she was the CEO, she was the chief financial officer. And
mm,
before that, she spent her entire career in finance and accounting jobs. Not exactly the background that you'd expect somebody to be a great storyteller, right?
right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Same with John Bryant, was a CEO of Kellogg's, a breakfast cereal company, right? Same thing. Before that, he was the CFO, and before that, he spent his whole career in finance type jobs. But both great storytellers,
Mm.
and I got to think that's part of why they became, the CEO when others didn't. So yeah, it's a very powerful tool set.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. What do you think is the role that storytelling plays in building empathy, and understanding between different individuals and communities? It just has this incredibly powerful way to do that. But what do you think the role of it is?
Well, there are a lot of different techniques to do both of those things you said,
Mm,
which I think was build empathy and gain understanding,
yes. Yep.
right? So, but storytelling is one of the better ones, I think. In fact, probably the best at both of those things. So, people generate empathy for other people when they can see themselves in that situation, and therefore they empathize with
Mm,
it,
yeah.
right? You sympathize with somebody when you feel bad for them. You empathize for somebody when you can feel what it's like to be in their situation. I think that's the very definition of empathy, and how it's different
Mm,
than sympathy, right?
yeah.
Well, how are you going to feel what it's like to be in somebody else's situation? How could you do that? Somebody has to tell you a story. There's no other way
Yes.
to really empathize with unless you witnessed it happen. Like, if you want
Yep.
to empathize with somebody in a car crash and you saw the car crash, you can empathize. But if you didn't see the car crash and I said, "Hey, Jason, I got a friend who was in a car crash. Do you feel empathy for them?"
Yeah.
No, you could sympathize. "Oh, that's terrible, Paul. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear that." But can you empathize with that person? Well, of course not, because you don't know anything about the accident.
Yep.
You weren't there. But if I tell you a detailed story about how it happened and how the poor guy's laying out on the street, bleeding out or whatever, now you can empathize with them. So
Yeah.
only a story can really help somebody empathize, not just
Mm,
sympathize. And I think for the same reason, it's the best tool for understanding, because I could tell you, look, there's three ways for you to be successful in this task you've got ahead of you. Or I can tell you a story about somebody who did all three of those things and succeeded. Now, which way are you going to have a better understanding?
Yeah.
Well, the story,
Yeah.
obviously, right? So I think it's probably just your best tool in both cases.
Absolutely. I'm curious, just from a leadership perspective, all of those interviews, what, how did you approach those interviews? Did you approach each one differently? Did you bring just the same set of questions? How did you get the best information out of all of those CEOs?
Yeah. Yeah. So well, all the interviews started with the same questions and ended with the same question, but they were all different in the middle because
Mm,
as you interview people here for a living,
yeah.
conversation is going to go all kinds of ways. But the probably the thing worth noting here is that like I said, I've interviewed probably 300 people by now, and like I said, these are people like the names that I've mentioned already. These are senior
Yes.
executive companies all over the world. I had a 93% acceptance rate when I asked people to interview with me,
Wow.
which is shockingly high. And I'm convinced here's the reason why. So many people, when I called them, agreed to spend 2 hours with me, either
Wow.
on the phone or face to face, out of these busy executives' day.
Yep.
And here's why. And this goes back to something I mentioned to you right before we went on air. Because I already had a publishing contract with a publisher. So I want you to imagine that I called you and you didn't know who I was. And I said, hey, Jason, I know you're really busy. You don't know me. My name's Paul Smith. I've always wanted to write a book about leadership. And so I'm finally going to do that. And I need to interview some smart people. Could you spend a couple hours with me on the phone, on the off chance that maybe I can get this book published?
Mm,
Your answer would almost certainly be no.
right.
Right. But imagine instead I called you and I said, hey, Jason, look, I know you're really busy and my name's Paul Smith. I know you don't know me, but I'm under contract with HarperCollins and the American Management Association to write a book on leadership that's going to be published next fall. And I'm looking for strong leaders at successful companies to feature in the book.
Wow.
Would you have some time to visit with me next week? Well,
Wow.
now what would you say?
Right. Right.
Of course. Well, sure,
Of,
Paul.
of, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm not going to waste your time and
Right.
the book's going to be published whether you're in it or not. Don't you kind of want to be in it?
Right.
Well, apparently 93% of people would like to be in a book.
Yep.
So having that publishing contract first really makes it easier to solicit those interviews.
Wow. That's just incredible. So if you were sitting down with an owner of a company who, their marketing team right now really doesn't utilize storytelling at all, what would you share with them to try to, bring them over to the other side to go, you got to start sharing the story of your company instead of just,
Yeah.
this marketing method.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's probably obvious. I would just give them an example,
Yeah.
So I would say, one of the people I interviewed for probably my third book, Sell with a Story, was Sherrod Madison. So you asked about marketing people. So one of my books was for sales and marketing people.
Hmm.
Um, Sherrod Madison was a CEO, still is a CEO of United Building Maintenance, which is a commercial cleaning company, right? These are the folks come in and clean your offices at night. And when he has a sales call on a new prospect, he always brings his sales VP with him and they go through a sales pitch.
Mm,
But he always finds an opportunity during the conversation to tell a personal story about what he
mm,
does when he gets a new client.
mm.
He says it's always the same. There's always like a 30-day transition period between when the old company or when I sign the contract and when my company takes over. And he says, I always do the same thing during that 30 days. He says, I sneak into the building in the middle of the night to watch how they're cleaning it now. Now, it's not really as nefarious as I probably just made it sound because, of course, he gets permission to do it, right?
Right.
But
Right. Right.
anyway, so he said, so, last month we took over the Verizon building in New Jersey and it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And so, I go in there and I see this guy and he's vacuuming the carpets and he's using the same kind of, residential quality vacuum cleaner that I use at home.
Mm,
And he said, the problem is, you got to imagine those corridors are 12 feet wide and a half a mile around. It's going to take that guy a month just to vacuum the carpets once. Plus, that it's not going to do a very good job. And that machine's going to break down every few weeks because it's just not made for this kind of volume of usage.
yep.
So when we took over, we put him into one of these triple wide commercial grade, vacuuming machines. It'll do a much better job in a fraction of the time. And that thing's going to last forever. And he said, but I wanted to see how they were dusting the offices. So, I went up a couple of floors and I looked on top of all the file cabinets and I saw the same thing on top of all of them. It was a half a moon swiped out on top. And he said, I know exactly what that means. And you probably do too. He said, those cabinets are standard 5.5 feet tall, 3 feet deep. He says, the people doing the cleaning, it's not that they were lazy. or poorly trained. They just
Right.
literally weren't tall enough to reach the top of the five and
Right.
a half foot, 3 foot deep, and that's what leaves that half a moon swiped out on top. And he said, truth is, they'd be better off not cleaning it at all because it's the contrast between the dirty part and the clean part that makes it obvious to the eye that, oh, that's dirty. He said, so when we took over, it was a simple solution. We just gave everybody these little 18-inch plastic extension wands so they could reach the back. Problem solved. Right now, he tells them that little story instead of saying
Yep.
something like, well, the reason why we're better than our competitors is because we use triple wide commercial grade vacuuming machines and we give all of our
Right.
dusters 18, I'm sure that's in the marketing brochure, and it was probably in the sales pitch too. But the story brings that to life in a way that the brochure doesn't.
Mm.
And so I would just sharing an example of marketing stories to a group of marketing people or sales stories to a
Yep.
group of salespeople, their eyes get big and they go, holy crap, I had no idea we could tell stories like that. That's great. Yeah, I want to do that.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Boy, that's so good. And it's amazing that it's still so underutilized in today's world. I mean, it's like, okay, how do we, lean into story even more? I was thinking about, you're the first part of your career, 20 years, corporate world, is there anything now with what if you could go back in time, with those companies you worked for, because you worked for some, I mean,
Mm.
really well-known companies, is there anything, with story that you would say, oh boy, I wish, I would have known this about story then because I could have, help them be so much more successful here or,
Yeah. Yeah. So innovation probably. In fact,
mm,
someday I'll write that book, Innovation with Stories or something. But um, I think there are some stories that could really, and I have one chapter. If you've read that book you held up there, Lead with the Story. There's
yeah.
one chapter in that about innovation and creativity. Um, I think if I'd known this then, I could have helped the company I worked for be even more innovative in all kinds of areas. Because I think there are a lot of stories about innovation that can be used as a springboard to help other people be more innovative in ways
Mm,
they hadn't even thought of.
yeah.
And I think that's probably an underutilized um, purpose for storytelling.
Yeah. Boy, that's good. Are there any techniques or strategies that you personally love that you utilize the most when it comes to, you engaging with an audience?
Yeah, a surprise ending. So this might be a surprising answer, but because we all love a surprise ending in the books we read and the movies we watch,
Yeah.
but even in a leadership story or sales
Yeah.
story, a surprise ending is really effective, and not just because it makes it more entertaining, although it does that as well. But it literally a surprise triggers the release of adrenaline in
Mm,
human beings, and that adrenaline has been shown physiologically to make the memory consolidation process faster and more efficient. So literally, surprises make things more memorable.
mm,
So if you include a surprise in your story, people will remember the story more, which means whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish with the story, whether it's a leadership story or sales and marketing story, your message will be remembered far longer
mm.
if you have a surprise in the story. So it plays a very practical role in storytelling. And most people they just don't even think that, well, surprises, well, that's for movies, but that's not for a leadership story. I'm just supposed to basically boss people around
Right.
but somehow, or I'll tell a story, but I'm still, being
Yeah.
very, buttoned up here and story and surprises. Well, that sounds Hollywood or something. And I
Right.
mean, there are techniques to create little surprises in stories that are just very effective and make
Mm.
stories so much more effective long term.
Yeah. That's great. Why do you think so many people, when they tell a story, and I fall into this trap, I mean, we all have, but we want to make ourselves the hero of the story?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason is just human pride. I mean,
Right.
yes, that's one of the most common problems, and I have to advise all of my clients, when you leave this class, do not go out there and write 10 stories about how awesome you are. You, I
Right.
tell them, I said, you can write five, but the other five need to be about other people, or they need to be about how a mistake you made.
Mm.
In fact, most of your stories in leadership should be about mistakes you made
Yeah.
so that other people can avoid those mistakes. So yeah, if all of your stories are about how awesome you are, you will be seen as the kind of leader who tells those kind of stories, and nobody will want to follow you. And a leader with no followers isn't a leader.
Wow. Okay, as our time wraps up, I just thought, could you give any advice to our listeners, to an aspiring storyteller, somebody who says, I want to get better at telling stories. I'm just kind of a rookie right now. How can I bring a meaningful impact, to the story? How can I, what was something I could do right now to make my stories, even more meaningful?
Well, probably the best advice I could give you is learn how first,
Mm,
right? Like if you wanted to learn to play the guitar, you probably wouldn't just go buy a guitar and start strumming on it and hope that you'd learn how to play it.
right,
You'd probably take guitar lessons, right?
right.
From somebody, right? So treat storytelling like any other skill that you want to learn, right? Go read a book, take a class, watch some videos, however you prefer to learn,
Mm,
go learn the techniques and then practice. Because if you just, a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to start telling more stories so I get good at it. Well, maybe, or maybe you'll get worse at it because you're
yeah,
practicing bad techniques,
yeah.
um, go learn how and then practice.
Ah, that's so good. That's so good. Okay, before I let you go, just thought we'd do some rapid fire questions. Get our listeners to keep getting to know you and who you are. Who are some of your favorite storytellers? Like, is there someone that stands out, or
Oh,
you know, or
yeah.
or a favorite story?
Yeah, and it's probably nobody you would imagine me saying, but Isaac Asimov.
Hmm.
So Isaac Asimov is most popularly known as a science fiction writer, but he also writes fabulous nonfiction, like the history of science. He actually has
Mm,
he passed away back in the 80s, I guess, but he had a PhD in chemistry, and he wrote all kinds of nonfiction about scientists and the amazing discoveries they made. And his writing just captivates me. And he tells just these amazing true stories of scientific discoveries. And the
mm,
kind of storytelling that I traffic in and teach people is nonfiction storytelling, not made up stories, but
mm.
true stories. So he just does it really well. And he's been one of my heroes.
Oh, I love that. Is there, if you're into podcasts, is there a podcast on the leadership side that you enjoy, or a guilty pleasure podcast that just fills your tank?
The two I listen to the most right now are one is um, the Lost Debate,
Hmm.
which is a news show. But well, anyway, you'll have it's a more fair and balanced, more deep dive news show, not just like hear the headlines 30 seconds
Right.
at a time. They'll take a whole 45 minutes and they'll go into four stories and that's it.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
uh, the other one I like right now is Michael Shermer, who's the publisher of Skeptic Magazine.
Hmm.
He's got a podcast where he brings on scientists and just talks about interesting recent discoveries, and I find that fascinating.
Hmm. Okay. A little bit more personal, being that you're in Ohio, are you a Skyline chili person or not so much?
Yeah. I guess it's pretty polarizing, but um, I do like it. I don't eat it very often. It's probably not really high on the healthy eating list.
Right.
But when I'm at a weak moment, I'll definitely pick one up.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, this was just incredible. Thank you so much for sharing such great insight. Before I let you go, is there somewhere we can send our listeners to find you online?
Yeah, my website
Okay,
is leadwithastory.com. So just the name of that first book. I was never more creative about website naming after that, so we just stuck with that one.
that's
So
perfect.
yeah, lead with the story.
That's perfect. Well, thank you. Just from one leader to another, I mean, your books and writing, your leadership, I've watched many of your talks online, have just been incredibly helpful, insightful, and helped my storytelling. So just thank you for that. And thank you for being on the podcast today. Just so appreciate your time.
Oh, you bet. I'm glad to hear that. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, and then thank you again to our listeners for joining us on the Speak with People podcast. Again, if you're looking to grow in your leadership and your communication skills, don't forget about our Speak with People community Facebook group. It's growing by leaders every single day. We curate stories, we take polls together. We post different videos to help us grow and inspire each other. So just search for the Speak with People community group on Facebook. And then if you are looking to become a better public speaker, don't forget to check out Speak with People's public speaking pathway. It is just a step-by-step guide with whatever level you're at to help you become a more effective, empathetic, captivating communicator. Well, thanks again for being a part of the podcast family. We really do appreciate every time you listen and download, and especially when you leave a review. Thank you for doing that. Again, this podcast exists because we believe our words matter and that healthy communication is oxygen for your relationships and your leadership. So we hope that today challenged you, inspired you to use words that really do matter, to communicate in a healthy way, because you really will change your world. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.